but of the two, probably the more outgoing.
Despite their rocky start, Brin and Page soon discovered they had much in common and began collaborating.
We weren't really sure we wanted to build a search engine. We sort of accidentally ended up building technology that could help search, and so then we built a search engine.
Myself and my partner Larry were just doing research in managing large amounts of information and what's called data mining, which means finding patterns in them. Eventually we turned to the World Wide Web, which is basically most of human knowledge.
What they found was a rapidly expanding universe of information and several flawed search engines.
First of all, just their coverage. They couldn't cover everything. They could go out and get more and more pages, but the scale was exploding at a speed faster than they could handle. And the time for response. That is, you went to one of those search engines and you discovered that it would take 10, 15 seconds, you get results back.
Brin and Page were convinced they could do better. They looked at the construction of web pages, at the clickable buttons which link one page to another. Then they looked at the billions of clickable links crisscrossing cyberspace, and they discovered a pattern. The more authoritative, more popular sites all had lots of incoming links.
Ultimately, what we discovered is that you could take the patterns that you found in all of the world's knowledge and use that to create a better search engine.
And that's exactly what they did. They wrote a search engine program which used the number of incoming links, along with lots of other variables, to identify which web pages were most relevant for each query. But finding computers to run the program was a problem. The machines that ran existing search engines were very expensive.
So they had to figure out how to make do with what they had, which was a lot of personal computers, cheap stuff that was laying around. And they were able to go and put these things together.
They took a bunch of computer hard drives and slaved them together. To save money, they built a cabinet out of children's Legos. After months of tweaking, they were finally ready to take their engine out for a trial run.
We put up an initial very simple prototype at Stanford. It was actually originally the project was called Backrub. Pretty soon after that, the next generation we called Google.
Google sent a bunch of cyber explorers called spiders or robots out onto the World Wide Web to forage for information. Each time they found a new web page, they copied it and sent it back to Brin and Page's computers. By 1998, they had stored 25 million pages. At the time, search engines were not widely used, so some website owners were incensed at the intrusion.
There was one guy who was an artist in Singapore, actually, who had a site. It was public. It was open on the web. Anybody could go and get things. It wasn't that it was being held private. But all of a sudden, he sees some computer at Stanford is downloading thousands of different pages from it. And we had to say to him, look, we're not saving the pages. We're not redistributing them. All we're doing is indexing. All we're doing is making a list of what we find so that other people can find it. But he actually went so far as to talk to the legal office, say he was going to sue.
Despite the contrarians, most people liked Brin and Page's souped-up engine. It not only gave relevant results, it was also a lot faster than the search engines using the expensive computers.
Typically, if you have a very large machine, the processor is running very fast, but there are bottlenecks. It takes it time. You can only do one disk drive at a time or something. What they realized is if you can figure out a way to get a lot of small machines working together on the search problem, that you don't have the same bottlenecks.
Brin and Page became obsessed with speed, doing everything they could to shave tenths and hundredths of a second off their search times.
And they realized that if they could bring that time factor down to a second or less, that people would use search in a totally different way. So in their design of the computers and the servers, they kept that as a really primary goal. They had to get it down. They had to throw in enough extra computing, enough extra research memory, whatever it took, so they could get that answer back in a second.
Everyone who tried Google liked it. The name was supposed to be Google, G-O-O-G-O-L, the mathematical term for 1 followed by 100 zeros. But
well, it was before the Google spell checker. existed. I'll say that.
Soon, the number of queries on Google became more than Brin and Page's computers could handle. Encouraged by the reception Google got at Stanford, Brin and Page began looking for partners who wanted to license their technology.
Larry has always been motivated, and Sergey too, really, by wanting to do something that's useful for the world. They both grew up in academic families. Making a lot of money wasn't what was important. It was learning, knowledge, teaching. And I think from the beginning, there wasn't a drive of what's the most profitable thing to do. There was really what's the way that people can get the most information.
But the world outside Stanford didn't share Brin and Page's idealism.
They said, this is a great idea technologically. But from the business point of view, at that time, the wisdom was search engines weren't where it was at. They were a technical thing. They were going to be part of the woodwork, part of the infrastructure.
In other words, you couldn't make money off of them. The big internet moneymakers were all portals, sites with lots of services and advertising, like Yahoo and America Online. Unable to license their invention, the two young search engineers went looking for investors to start their own company. They found Andy Bechtolsheim, founder of Sun Computing.
Andy whipped out his checkbook and on the hood of his car wrote a check to Larry and Sergey for $100,000 and said, well, what do I write it out? What do I make the check out to? And they said, well, we're thinking of calling the project Google, so he wrote it out to Google, and that forced them to incorporate.
Putting their PhD plans on hold, Brin and Page set up shop in a friend's home.
We thought, well, they'll probably just be there during the day while we're at work and we won't notice. But they were actually there 24 hours a day, all the time.
As Page and Brin toiled, the number of queries rose to 10,000 a day, and the press began to take notice. Articles praising Google appeared in newspapers and magazines. PC Magazine named Google one of its top 100 websites.
They ultimately secured $25 million in funding from two of the biggest names in venture capital. And when that happened, that's when the greater world first got an inkling that this might be an important company.
Funding in hand, still battling enormous odds, Brin and Page moved their fledgling company into spacious new quarters.
Sergey and Larry have all the advantages of youth. They think that basically they're doing something terrific and they're really out to change the world, to use Steve Jobs' phraseology.
In 1999, one-year-old Google had 39 employees and was receiving 3 million queries a day. A year later, queries were up to 60 million a day. During that time, Brin and Page introduced advertising on their search pages and signed partnership deals extending Google's reach to Italy, the United Kingdom, Japan, and China. The company was clearly on a roll. To meet demand, Brin and Page hired hundreds of new employees, many PhDs, the best and the brightest.
In addition to just being bright, great at their job, accomplished, we want people who are going to fit the Google culture. We have a very open, free atmosphere here. People have lots of fun. They're excited about their work and they work together a lot.
Part think tank, part playground. Google's headquarters were a reflection of that culture.
When we started Google, we started it to be the kind of place basically that we would like to hang out in, we being, computer science grad students. And so, we had all this free food.
Here, you just walk in, you grab some healthy food. You can sit and chat with your colleagues, talk about all kinds of work projects, learn about new things.
It's a place where you can meet over a game of pool and discuss some ideas there. And so we find that this kind of environment, is very creative.